The political conflict over immigration enforcement recently came to a head in the City Council chamber. Chiefly at issue was the civil arrest of a construction worker, Jose Martin Paz Flores, by federal agents acting on information provided by the Boston police. A local ordinance called the Trust Act prohibits the police from detaining immigrants solely for enforcement by ICE. Police Commissioner William Gross denies any violation of the act, but some councilors say the law might need to be strengthened. Our guest is a leading sponsor of the Trust Act, the City Councilor from District 8, Josh Zakim. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, in general, go back to when you had this law put on the books, I think about 5 years ago. Why was it so important?
So it was 2014. It was certainly a different world then, particularly when it comes to immigration. But, there had been an issue. We heard from a lot of advocates in the immigrant communities, from organized labor, from activists, that people who were immigrants, regardless of their status, but obviously particularly undocumented people, were very concerned about interacting with the Boston police as victims, as witnesses of crime. And we thought it was necessary and helpful. We worked with Commissioner Evans at the time, with Mayor Walsh, to create an ordinance called the Boston Trust Act, which prohibits the Boston police from holding people for immigration reasons. It doesn't mean they're not going to prosecute you if they catch you shoplifting or stealing a car or whatever it is, but we're not going to act as immigration enforcement. And that law, at the time, was the strongest one in the country passed. There were no exceptions, because we feel that to really have trust, to make us all safer, anyone should be comfortable talking to the police. If they're a witness, if they're a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, they were often being threatened by the perpetrator with immigration consequences if they went to the police. So that was successful, that was important. But we're 5 years later. Donald Trump is the president. The climate has certainly changed, and I think it's probably time to strengthen and reevaluate that bill.
In the case of Jose Martin Paz Flores, an unauthorized immigrant, the police didn't actually detain him, but they told ICE where to find him, I guess.
So, I would say that that incident in particular, doesn't violate the letter of the law. I certainly think the police complied with it. They didn't detain him, but that is concerning. I think we need to learn a little bit more about what the police interaction with ICE is and how we do that on a day-to-day basis. So I've asked for information from the Boston police on those agreements, on those communications with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and we're going to have another follow-up hearing on it, because we need to, as legislators, as civilians, as people in the city of Boston, I think we need to be thoughtful about this, and we need to make sure that the intent of this act, which both Commissioner Gross, Mayor Walsh, my colleagues all continue to support, it may need to be tweaked, it may need to be strengthened. 5 years is certainly a long time when it comes to the climate around immigration enforcement in this country. And for me, I don't think people in the city of Boston want their local officials, want their tax dollars being spent enforcing Donald Trump's immigration policies.
If you look at statistics in Boston since the Trust Act was put on the books, unauthorized immigrants, they're not the real headline in violent crime, especially for homicides, but there have been some homicides committed by gang members from MS-13. Okay. So, don't people on that other side have a point?
Well, the police department continues to investigate and prosecute people. If you're committing a crime in the city of Boston, whether it's violence, whether it's property crime, the police are going to investigate, they're going to arrest, and they're going to charge you. What I don't think should be happening is the Boston Police Department acting as an arm of immigration enforcement, particularly in 2019, when we know the Federal Department of Homeland Security, when we know our president is their immigration policies are clearly motivated by racial bias. It's pretty crystal clear. Courts have said that. The president doesn't often deny it. So that is something that I think is going to be one of the moral tests of our time. And the people of Boston, rightfully, I think, are standing up for civil rights, whether it's in protests, whether it's in legislation. There are bills at the State House that are supposed to provide similar protection. And that's what we should be doing. It's the right thing to do, but it also does make us all safer. If someone is undocumented, but they're the witness of a crime, or they're a victim of violent crime, you want them talking to the Boston police so that those perpetrators, the violent people, the offenders, are taken off the streets.
I know it's a little bit beyond the city's jurisdiction, but it is a local question about access to immigrants in courthouses. There was an ICE official who spoke at a community meeting recently. He said they need to get them in courthouses because that's the place where it's least likely to result in violence.
I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I think it's a little disingenuous. I think it goes right to the issue, and I fully support both our district attorneys, Rachel Rollins and Marion Ryan, who have joined that lawsuit to prevent ICE from picking up people in our courthouses. If we're going to have free and open access to justice, and I'll be clear, the U.S. Constitution and the Massachusetts Constitution do not limit those rights to U.S. citizens. They do not limit those rights to people with current, regardless of their documentation. So there are certain human and civil rights that occur here, and that is, I think, a right to be in court, a right to participate, and again, it makes our system work better. A district attorney who needs someone to testify in a case who may not be documented, how are they going to get them to appear in court when they know an immigration officer might be standing outside to arrest them for what is a civil violation? Being undocumented in this country is not a crime. It's a civil violation, and I think there's a big difference there. And the ability to detain people based on that has some serious Fourth Amendment implications, and I just think it's been so clear what motivates and what has been motivating this policy of detention, deportation, separation of families is just completely reprehensible, and we don't want any part of it in Boston.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Boston City Councilor Josh Zakim. Councilor, as far as maybe at least tweaking the Trust Act, is there something that you'd like to do?
Yeah. Well, we're certainly talking with some of my colleagues, the police department, Mayor Walsh's administration, and advocates about what needs to be done that is feasible to make this stronger, whether it's that city agencies from the police department to the Public Works Department are just not going to share information with the federal government when it comes to immigration status. Now, we're not going to prohibit all cooperation. That's unrealistic and that doesn't make sense. But we're going to have a second hearing on this, and we're going to hear from the folks on the ground, the police department, civil rights attorneys, immigration lawyers, advocates, people who are caught up in this system to see what can make this better. We all agree on the goals. And that was something that was very encouraging from the first hearing. Was Commissioner Gross, the Walsh administration, my colleagues in the City Council, the advocates, the other people who testified. People want immigrants to feel safe in the city. They want to feel that they should be able to pick up the phone, talk to the Boston police, and have their rights protected. And I think that's a good common goal, and we're going to figure the best way to get there.
One thing I imagine the police would want to bring to the table here is their concerns about, I guess there was one case a few years ago when somebody, I think there was some guilty finding of people who are hatching a terrorist plot aiming at police. Is there some way you can allow the police to feed information about that without violating the other rights? Oh,
absolutely. Listen, the Boston police, whether it's the police and the FBI or DEA or Homeland Security, they work together on public safety issues, counterterrorism issues all the time, and they should continue to do that, and that's a successful partnership. But to work together to arrest and detain nonviolent people simply because of their immigration status is unacceptable. And the one incident we're talking about of Mr. Paz Flores, that came about. We learned about this because the Trump administration, the Labor Department, sued his employer for violating his rights as an employee because they weren't paying workman's compensation, because they tried to intimidate him from filing claims by working with Boston police and immigration. So this is an unusual case. It's by no means happens every day, and I want to be clear about that. And I also want to be clear that the Boston police are not breaking the rules as they stand now. They're following the rules. But what we need to do, and what this incident I think has highlighted, is that there's an opportunity to look at this again. When we passed the Trust Act in 2014, it was necessary and it was helpful, but the climate under the Obama administration, Department of Homeland Security versus the Trump administration, I don't have to tell you, is around 180 degrees.
This is also your first appearance with us since you announced that you're not running for election. So people might be wondering, what are you going to do next?
Well, it's a good question. I'm really excited to continue working on things like the Trust Act, on city services. The term doesn't end until January, so there's plenty for us to do. But I hope to stay and continue to work in the civic, nonprofit sector, advocacy about some of the issues I've worked on as a city councilor. So more to come on that front.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
City Councilor Josh Zakim.